Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, please consider subscribing to the channel. Most of you listening are not currently subscribed, so take this opportunity to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a story. Thank you. Kelly Bergdorf, a 20-year-old resident of Bridgewater, Virginia, lived with her 4-year-old daughter and was well liked by the community. She had been in a romantic relationship with her husband since their sophomore year of high school, and everyone in town spoke highly of her. Kelly also made an effort to keep in touch with her mother and sisters on a daily basis. To support her family, she worked night shifts at a local gas station, even though they were not struggling financially. Kelly valued the idea of making a contribution to provide for her family and save money for her daughter's future college education. However, tragedy struck on June 18, 1982, when Kelly was working her usual night shift at the Imperial gas station in Harrisonburg. The gas station was located on South Main Street, Route 11, and Kelly had taken the job because her sisters had either worked there in the past or were still currently employed by the gas station. On this particular night, Kelly was covering for one of her sisters for some extra college money for her daughter. Her mother, Rachel, would often call the gas station to check if her daughters needed any food or hot coffee brought over to help them through their shift. When Rachel spoke to Kelly that night, everything seemed normal, and it was just another average night at the gas station. However, little did she know that it would be the last time she would ever talk to her daughter. Around 2:30 in the morning, after Kelly's mother had gone to bed, the events of the evening took a dark and terrifying turn. Kelly apparently called the Harrisonburg police to report that she had been aggressively harassed by a man who was improperly dressed. Kelly was too polite to describe the man's actions in detail, but it's likely that he had exposed himself to her. A few minutes after the first call, Kelly called again, pleading for a patrol unit to be sent to the gas station, as the man had been calling and making obscene threats. She believed he was willing to follow through with them, and was growing anxious. The dispatcher promised to send a unit as soon as possible and instructed her to hang tight. However, moments after the second call ended, Kelly called 911 again in a complete panic. She demanded to know how far away the responding officers were, as the same deranged customer had apparently returned and was sitting in a silver or gray Ford parked in the gas station's lot. The last thing the dispatcher heard was Kelly screaming that the man had just gotten out of the vehicle and was heading towards the gas station's main building. She then slammed the phone down, apparently preparing to defend herself. The police rushed to the Imperial gas station, expecting to arrive to a violent assault in progress. However, when they arrived, the gas station was quiet. They searched the entire site, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. All that remained of Kelly was her purse. There were no signs of a violent struggle or robbery. It seemed as if she had vanished without a trace. Kelly's family suspected that if the culprit was armed, he could have easily forced her into his vehicle within seconds. They believed that Kelly would have fought back fiercely against an unarmed attacker. During the police investigation, a nearby convenience store clerk reported that a man driving a gray vehicle had visited the store about a half hour before Kelly's disappearance. The clerk described the man as 20 to 25 years old with blonde shoulder-length hair. Despite efforts to locate the man, the police were unable to make a connection between him and Kelly's apparent abduction. Kelly's 3 sisters, who also worked at the gas station, were interviewed by the police. They revealed that obscene phone calls were commonplace, but nobody took them seriously, believing them to be from harmless perverts. They were unsure if the man who harassed Kelly in person was the same person making the phone calls, as they didn't appear overly threatening. The phone calls stopped for a while after Kelly's abduction, but resumed 6 weeks later, when a new employee received lewd comments from the same apparent pervert. It is possible that the person making the lewd phone calls was not involved in Kelly's abduction and didn't want to implicate themselves in such a heinous crime. Alternatively, they may have been satisfied with abducting Kelly and didn't feel the need to make another call until the urge resurfaced about 6 weeks later. When asked about their daughter's disappearance, Kelly's parents shockingly confirmed that they believed the abductor was someone from the local community. The police had requested that they not reveal the man's name publicly, but Kelly's parents believed he was someone she had gone to high school with and had a history of indecent exposure and obscene phone calls. However, if Kelly had known the man personally, she likely would have named him during one of her 911 calls leading up to her abduction. It's possible that the man had obscured his face, or Kelly didn't recognize him after so many years. It's also possible that she was too scared to mention his name during one of the calls. Despite the police finding the possibility of this man being the culprit plausible, there was not enough evidence to charge him with any crime. Authorities questioned several other suspects in the case, but at a time when CCTV cameras and DNA evidence were still far from reality, placing a suspect at the gas station on the night of Kelly's disappearance was nearly impossible. The person who abducted Kelly seemed like a ghost, showing up, bundling her into a vehicle, and then vanishing without a trace. All that remained was her purse and the vehicle description, which was not enough for the police to secure a suspect. Kelly was declared legally deceased by local authorities, but her family, pouring money into private investigators, are no closer to finding solid answers almost 4 decades later. The only truth we have is the terrifying reality that Kelly went to work that night without suspecting a thing and encountered someone who caused her to vanish. A horrifying thought that could happen to anyone. I am a 17-year-old female residing in Oklahoma. Due to daylight savings, our sunset shifts from around 7 or 8 p.m. to 5:30 or 6 p.m. during winters. Consequently, anyone out after 5:30 p.m. is in complete darkness except for the faint light from street lamps. Unfortunately, the area I reside in has been deteriorating lately after reaching its peak and dying down. As a result, crime, drugs, and other issues have become more common. Although it used to be a safe place to live, and people would often call me spoiled when I was younger because most homes are exquisite. I am employed as a kennel tech, taking care of dogs and cats, cleaning floors and counters, washing dishes, doing laundry, and taking out the trash. My workplace, a vet clinic, is 4 blocks away from my house, making it convenient for me to travel. However, I do not own a car and usually rely on my parents for rides. Although I work the night shift, I usually leave around 7 to 7:30 p.m., even though the clinic closes at 6 p.m. It's always dark when I leave, even if I get off at 5:45 p.m. One night, after an exhausting shift with kennel runs filled to capacity, I made the mistake of chugging a Red Bull and told my boss that I could manage everything alone, hoping to impress her. I ended up staying there until 8 p.m., which is super late for anyone working as a kennel tech. We only accept dogs and cats, and walk-ins are usually not allowed after 5 p.m. After finishing my work, I did the final rounds of checking on the dogs and cats and started the last load of laundry in the dryer. I then clocked out, set the alarm, and locked the deadbolt before taking a few steps away from the clinic. However, my attention was drawn to 3 men loitering about 300 feet away near our mailbox. This residential area only had neighborhoods, so there was no valid reason for anyone to be at the clinic. I slammed the door shut, which weighed at least 200 pounds, and locked it as I turned around to face the men. One of them caught my eyes, and I noticed his broad shoulders and high hood that concealed his face. My intuition immediately raised red flags, and my heart skipped a beat. Following my instincts, I tried to walk around them, giving them a wide berth. But after taking 8 steps, I heard the sound of their feet hitting the ground. This made me turn on my heel and bolt towards the door, while clutching my key in a Wolverine-style grip. Fumbling with the lock, I finally undid the deadbolt and slipped inside. However, one of them snatched at my sleeve just as the door slammed on his fingers, and I felt a surge of relief hearing him scream in pain. The door's weight worked in my favor, and I managed to escape inside, although not very gracefully, tripping through the threshold in my haste to remove the man from my sleeve. Once inside, I had a panic attack, hyperventilating and sobbing on all fours, trying to get away from the door as quickly as possible. As I saw the blood on my hands and the floor, my panic increased even more. I had cut my lip open on one of my teeth and hit the ground so hard that my eyebrow was busted. The alarm was blaring, the dogs were barking, and the 3 men were banging on the back door's bulletproof window, screaming obscenities at me. The guy in front had an expression of pure evil and malice in his eyes as he looked at me through the glass. In my incomprehensible and panicked state, I didn't turn off the alarm. Instead, I curled up under the counter and sobbed until they eventually stopped about 15 minutes later. The cops showed up around the same time, as the alarm company had alerted my boss when I didn't turn off the alarm within 30 seconds. When the police found me, I was completely unresponsive to sound and light. I only began to regain my memory when my parents arrived. They caught the 3 men buying finger splints at the nearby CVS, 2 blocks away. Apparently, the one who tried to snatch at my sleeve had broken 3 fingers in our door, while another had also fallen on the tile floor like I had. Although it was not important, I found it mildly amusing that all 3 of them were so clumsy. I received 2 stitches in my lip and a staple in my eyebrow. Later on, I learned that these men had been watching me for at least a week. They had been waiting at the side of the clinic almost every day, but never acted because I would usually have a ride home, or one of my bosses would stay and chat until 30 or 40 minutes after we close. All 3 of them had warrants out for their arrests on drug charges and assaults, with one even linked to multiple car break-ins in the area. It's safe to say that none of them will be walking the streets anytime soon. I used to work as a security guard at a remote resort located deep in the woods near my hometown. Although it was a Holiday Inn property and of high quality, its location was quite peculiar. The resort was vast, and I manned the first checkpoint that greeted visitors as they entered the property. The guard shack was a small, square building measuring about 15 by 15 feet. Inside, there was a microwave, a small fridge, a desk, and several monitors. Most of the time, I would just sit back and watch the cars coming down the old country road that led to the resort. It was a cool job, and I got to be lazy and watch movies while checking guests in as they arrived. It was a low-stress gig, and I only left my post when there was an emergency that required my attention. Such incidents were rare. However, one night, something happened that was out of the ordinary. The area around the guard shack was surrounded by acres of dense woods, followed by a small town of just over 300 people and farmland. The town was generally peaceful, and there were no known crazy or weird individuals. As usual, I was watching the monitors when I saw something bizarre. A blurry, out-of-focus man appeared to be running through the woods, and as time passed, he was getting closer and closer to my guard station. It was odd because there was nothing in those woods except trees, and this man was coming straight towards me. I decided to cautiously step outside and see what the man wanted since I had no idea where he came from. As he got closer to the guard shack, I noticed that he was a short Hispanic man in his 40s with torn, bloody clothes and no shoes. He was covered in sweat, dirt, and looked like he had been crying. He was totally hysterical and kept repeating, "Please help me, man. They're trying to hurt me. They wouldn't let me leave. They're trying to kill me." I asked him where he came from, and he pointed towards the woods, which made me feel uneasy. I then asked him if he had any identification or clothes, but he said that his things were taken and put in garbage bags. He also said that the people who were after him were in a white windowless van, and they were looking for him. As he told me this, I saw the headlights of a car coming down the road, and it was around 2 a.m. I suggested that he hide behind the building for a moment while the car passed, and if it was the same van, then he should stay hidden. Sure enough, a white windowless van drove towards us, but it did not stop and drove right past us. They made a U-turn and went down the other road next to the shack, which scared me. I radioed my colleagues immediately and informed them of the situation. The man, 3 other security guards, and I sat in the guard shack while we watched the white van slowly drive around the parking lot. Eventually, it stopped about 100 yards away and turned off its lights alongside the woods. At that point, we decided to call the police and report what was happening. A few minutes later, the van's lights turned on again, and it started driving straight toward us. My colleague Jared stepped outside onto the road and tried to flag the van down to stop, but it didn't slow down and almost hit him. The license plate was covered in tape, so we couldn't give that information to the police. About 15 minutes later, the police arrived, but they weren't able to do much besides offer to take the man wherever he needed to go. I never found out what happened after that, and it remains the eeriest encounter I've ever had. I am employed at a 24-hour gas station in California and work the night shift. The gas station is located off a highway outside of San Diego, and it is not uncommon to have a high influx of customers at all hours of the night. As usual, I greeted my coworker and clocked in to begin my shift. Surprisingly, we were quite busy that night, even though it was a Wednesday. A few hours into my shift, while attending to a couple of customers, the phone started ringing. I tend to avoid answering the phone if possible, because I dislike dealing with people over the phone. Luckily, I was preoccupied with the customers, but in other situations, I would have to answer the call. My boss had previously reprimanded me for not answering the phone, reminding me that he checks the call logs regularly. Once I had finished serving the customers, the phone had stopped ringing. However, it started ringing again after 5 minutes. This time, I had no choice but to answer the call since I was on my phone in the back room. Following my boss's instructions, I greeted the caller and asked how I could assist them. There was a moment of silence before a man asked for a person named Tommy. I had been working at the gas station for a year, so I knew all the employees, and I informed the caller that there was no employee named Tommy. The caller then hung up. At the time, I didn't think much of the incident and returned to my phone. Fast forward an hour later, around 1 in the morning, and the customer traffic both inside the gas station and on the roads had decreased. I decided to begin stocking items overnight when there were no customers in the store. While I was stocking, the phone rang again, and I picked it up, using the usual greeting of "Hi, how can I help you?" However, there was no answer, so I tried saying hello a few more times, but to no avail. I hung up and returned to my work. Shortly after, the phone rang again, and the same thing happened. I began to think it was a prank call since it was strange for someone to call and not have an actual question. Things took a bizarre turn when the phone rang again within the same time frame as the previous calls. I walked over to the counter and saw that it was the same number calling. I ignored it and went back to work. However, the calls kept coming, and they were closer together each time. After what felt like the 100th call, I picked up and angrily told the caller to stop calling, and that it was not funny. I hung up, relieved that the torture had ended. Unfortunately, my relief was short-lived. About 20 minutes later, while taking inventory from the cash register, I noticed a white 4-door sedan parked next to my car outside. Although it caught my attention, I resumed counting until the phone rang again. It was the same number from earlier. I was annoyed and freaked out, so I chose to ignore it. Upon finishing my inventory count, I shut the cash register and glanced at the security cameras. The white sedan was still parked outside, which was unusual. It had been stationary, with both its lights and engine turned off for the last 10 minutes. Though I don't usually get spooked, the bizarre phone calls and the car outside had started to unnerve me. I retreated to the back room when the phone rang again. Checking the caller ID, I saw that it was the same person harassing me. I answered the phone, speaking firmly, "If you call this number again, I will contact the police." In the deafening silence that followed, my skin crawled as I looked up and saw a man with a black poncho and a phone pressed to his ear staring at me through the window. I was just a few feet away from him, and his gaze sent shivers down my spine. I screamed and slammed down the phone, scurrying into the back room and locking the door. From there, I checked the security camera footage, and the man was still there, immobile, looking in at me. I was filled with sheer terror. The phone continued to ring, and each time it did, the man would hold the phone up to his ear and redial. This went on for 10 excruciating minutes until a couple of men arrived and seemed to confront him, and he walked back to his car. But he never drove away, just sat inside the car. I still had a few hours left on my shift, so I texted my colleague, asking if he could come in early. He responded quickly and arrived 20 minutes later, finding the car still parked outside. To be safe, I asked him to escort me to my car, and he obliged. I sped away, checking my rearview mirror, but the car didn't follow me. My colleague texted me when he returned to the gas station, stating that the man left in the opposite direction soon after I left. Since then, I've continued to work there, and none of us have seen the man return. I still can't explain what happened that night. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and sharing it to support me. The best is yet to come.